we are going to start on time. I'd like to welcome everybody to the January, it is a new year, TAC meeting. So I'm calling the meeting to order at 9:30. I'm going to turn it over to Coley for a roll call and determination form, please.
We do have people online as well. Bob Snyder just sent us an email to say he would have to attend remotely because he has to be in Manassas or somewhere straight after.
Great.
Ms. Jamie Jackson.
Here.
Mr. Bassam Amin.
Here.
Mike Craig.
Here.
Mr. Brian Council.
Here.
Here.
White.
Here.
Mr. Jacob Paswick. Mr. Mohammed bin Omar. Mr. Nick Miner. Ms. Kimberly Wilson. Mr. Mike Fincham. Mr. Craig Pennington. Mr. Stephen Miner. Ms. Amy Garbarini. Mr. Todd Horsley. Ms. Michelle Shropshire. Here. Mr. Stephen Haynes.
Here.
Mr. Jim Ponticello. Mr. Dan Grinnell. Dr. Bob Schneider, I think, is online. Mr. Joe Stainsby. Mr. Joe Stainsby. It's Christine Hoffner. Mr. Nick Ruiz.
Here.
Mr. Greg Reed. Gregory. Ms. Gibson. Here. Quorum is present.
All right, thank you. All right, so in front of you, you have the agenda for this month's meeting. Do we make any changes for next? Okay. This will be okay.
For who?
When Nick leaves, we'll form right to approve anything.
We will still have a quorum,
Okay,
I
sure.
believe. Coley, am I correct? That if we lose one voting member, we will still have a quorum.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
A motion to approve.
All right,
Second.
all right, we got the motion has been made, properly second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. All right, we're moving forward with that. Don't have any minutes. Did I miss that?
They're under consent agenda.
Okay, just want to make sure. Great, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Ian then.
Connor, if you can just pull up the last policy committee thing agenda from November. If you'll remember, our last policy committee meeting was in November, so it's a little bit old news now, so I won't dwell on it very much, just to share some highlights in case anybody missed the meeting. But the agenda, please. Okay, so scroll down, please. The annual listing of transportation project obligations. Remember, that is a item that you've seen. We list the obligations in arrears, not in advance. So it's old news by the time it gets to that particular list. The TIP administrative modification, it's back on the agenda today of the TAC meeting. It was approved by the policy committee. However, the VDOT requests an actual resolution. So in your pack today, you will see under the consent agenda a resolution. It's for the same item. We're going to take a formal resolution to the policy committee because they need it as a resolution, and it was approved in November just as an administrative modification without a resolution. So it's come back to us a second time. Scroll down. In my report, I just gave a brief update on where we are with the bridge, the Rappahannock River Crossing Bridge potential project, and just some updates on our existing projects. The transit report public comment, we officially closed the public comment period and presented the report. The CMAC call for projects update just was a list of the projects that you all have applied for. The East-West Mobility Study roadway report. that was approved for public comment, and it's currently out for public comment. It will continue until the end of the month. The FAMPO East-West Study Transit Report was presented again and was actually approved by the policy committee. So now it's official policy of FAMPO. Scroll down, please. The letter to OIPI, this item was, I had so many different opinions, even up to the point of getting to this item on the agenda. We had our new member for the CTB from this region who didn't like the letter, thought it was not appropriately put together, didn't agree that the problems were as significant as we were saying they were. I know that Marcy Parker from the district was unhappy with the letter, also saying that we haven't captured some of the detail in the technical guide for smart scale. Paul feels very strongly in the other direction. Other members here feel quite strongly. Carrie, a staff member, felt that the technical guide is very unclear on this issue. I had Ms. Bomke say to me that she felt that the letter was worded very harshly and didn't like it. So many people came at me with so many different opinions on the letter. So what I did was withdraw the letter in the meeting. That might not impress all of you, but I felt that to approve it with everybody hating it for different reasons. Some people not feeling like it goes far enough, other people thinking it went too far. So I withdrew it. So for what it's worth, shoot me, I'm the one who withdrew it from the agenda, but I didn't think I was going to get it approved in the meeting anyway. I thought it was going to just end up in a big fight and not get it approved, and then we would have not gotten anywhere. So I just withdrew the item. We can discuss the matter yet again today. I think we should discuss it, and it's on the agenda today. We then proposed the meeting calendar. That was agreed to, and then there was just some correspondence and agency reports. Take any questions, but that's just the summary of what happened in the meetings.
Can you provide a brief summary of the comments received on the transit report? Or on all of them, or I guess it's still open, right? You're saying?
So there are two different reports. There's the transit report,
Yeah.
which is completed, closed, and adopted.
Yeah.
And there's the roadway report, which is currently underway, and it's on our agenda today. We're giving an update on it today in the meeting.
Okay.
So the transit report, we're not, because it's closed and it's on the website as an approved report now of FAMPO. But largely the public comment was in favor of the 4 projects in the report.
Okay.
Like 70+ percentages on all of the items and all the questions we asked in the survey.
Okay.
There's some differences. Some were liked more by the public than others. But largely, it's like 3/4 of the public is for the projects. Carly, is that fair?
Was your question, Nick, related to the public comment or the board comment?
The public comment,
Okay.
the 1-month public comment.
Okay.
So they're generally 3 out of 4 in support of the
projects.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And similarly on the FAMPO policy committee, it wasn't unanimous. I think 2 members voted against, but it was a strong majority.
On what?
Adopting the transit report.
On I guess they have specific objections to it generally.
None were announced in the meeting in November. There were a number of concerns raised in the October meeting.
Okay.
I believe the consultant and the FAMPO staff addressed most of those. One of the concerns was that putting a rapid bus lane on 3 was not supported by most people. We took that out of the plan. The bike path in Stafford County, the routing was not preferred, and so we changed the routing of that bike path. I forget what all the other comments were, but
ultimately it passed.
Okay.
So that's what I would.
it's a majority that supported it. Something like 80% of the policy committee supported it.
Good to know.
It's now officially pamper policy.
All right. Any other questions for Ian? We will keep moving on. We are at item number 5, which is a public comment period. Comments and questions for members of the public are welcome at this time. Staff will also read comments submitted by the public prior to the meeting. If we open it up for public comment, do you have anything written that we need to be aware of?
Everything written is just in relation to the roadway report,
Sure.
so that will be compiled and presented.
As part of it, sure. Okay, all right, and do we have any members of the public who wish to speak at this time? Yes, ma'am? If you could introduce yourself, including your name, and we'll go from there.
Great. I'm Fran Larkins, and
Fran.
I'm accompanied by 2 members of my team, Ross Reeder and Kim Jacoby. And we're speaking for ourselves personally. There is a bit, we live in Celebrate off of Route 17 in South Stafford. And we are assuming that there are differences of opinion in our community about the bridge, which is they call to go over in the vicinity of Celebrate Parkway. And but we just, there's some people who think, oh great, 5 minutes and we'll be across the river at Central Park. Other people say, wait, not so fast. It's not going to be 5 minutes because we're going to have truck traffic zooming by our homes. And other people say, we don't need the bridge. We're fine with how I-95, how the 2 extra lanes to get onto 95, how that's improved our access to Central Park. So, but what we wanted to do was just to ask you to please consider as many options as you can. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm still in favor of an outer connector and an outer beltway to get those trucks up from around Fredericksburg and off of 17. But we just wanted to point out to you that though it's very tempting to take a look at Celebrate Parkway and see that 4-lane road, and it looks like such an obvious solution, the huge increase in traffic on Celebrate Parkway would really, really be devastating for our Celebrate by Del Webb community. We have over 1,000 homes of senior citizens. We have 5 entrances onto the parkway, and every one of those entrances is used by our residents to get to the lodge, to get to the amenities at the lodge. So we use it as our community road. We are by proffer a gated community, and each one of those entrances is going to have a gate. And when people start backing up on the parkway, which they're going to do because the gates aren't going up fast enough, or the gate is broken, or somebody's run through the gate, it's going to make a problem on the parkway. It's also that we have concerns about pollution. We have concerns about the historical area that we're in. But the main thing is we would want, and there are other homes as well off of the parkway. But we say, please look at other options, because using Celebrate Parkway should not be the route to get across the river. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? All right. Well, we thank you again for your comments. We do appreciate those. As I always say about public comment, the people that are usually at the table are the ones who are heard. We've got members from all jurisdictions here to hear that. I will call us the ground level staff that helps formulate the discussion that goes up to our leadership. So we do consider these comments as taken seriously as we go through our processes. This gives us the opportunity later to reflect on them, because at the end of the day, we're all residents of this community and or work in this community. So we want to make sure that we're considering everything as decisions are made. So thank you. And I really do mean that. So thank you. Any other members of the public? I will close the public comment period. All right, thank you. All right, item number 6, we have 2 items on the consent agenda. This includes the approval of November 7th meeting minutes. It must seem like a long ago, but right before your turkey. If you eat that, if you don't eat turkey, I'm sorry for you. I love meat.
I roasted a turkey.
Was it good? Okay, never mind. Resolution 23-13 is the other item on the consent agenda. Can I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda if somebody?
Motion to approve.
All right, and
Second.
all right, thank you. We've got a motion and a second. If you got that, we've got Paul and Nick. just in case.
Thank you.
All right, any discussion items or any questions? Ian did address some earlier. All right, all those in favor, say aye. Those opposed can say nay. Guys have it, we're moving forward. All right, the next item is Nick, this is you, and Nick may have to scoot out just a little bit early. So we appreciate him giving us this update.
Should I go up there or?
We will clap for you wherever you stand, sir, so you
Okay.
let us know where you want to be.
I'll stand up here. I need to stand. I'll be sitting all afternoon in a conference. So, let me just start over here.
Throw Connor off if you need to stand behind the computer screen.
Do you mind if I stand behind the computer? Yeah, you got it. Okay, cool. Thanks. Cool. Dick Ruiz, for those of you who don't know me, Virginia Railway Express Planning Program Manager. I'm going to give you a brief yet detailed update on the System Plan 2050 that we've been working on since late summer of last year, and talk about some of the trends that we saw in the analysis of existing ridership patterns over the past couple of years. We're kind of right at the cusp of going from phase 1 to phase 2, and so I'm going to explain a little more about that transition. So this is what we're going to be talking about this morning. And number 6 should be of interest to all of you because that's what's coming next. So where we are right now, we're kind of straddling these two phases here. We basically completed all of phase 1. We had conversations with all of our partner jurisdictions and stakeholders. We established a set of visions and goals. We presented them to our operating board. And we're currently evaluating ridership trends and potential new markets for Virginia Railroad Express. So in phase 2, which is kicking off now, we actually are going to the board in next Friday, not this coming Friday, to ask them to approve the task order for phase 2. We're going to be actually looking at real future VRE service scenario alternatives in 2030 and in 2050. And we're going to be analyzing those service scenarios against the set of established goals and, of course, the overall vision of the plan. And then key in phase 2, we're going to be entering kind of a new era of VRE public outreach. We're going to be seeking a very robust level of feedback from stakeholders in the public that we really haven't done as much, specifically focusing on non-riders and not even transit riders. So we're going to be doing a general population survey that will be agnostic of VRE. So we will be branding it as a general transportation survey. It will be with the assistance of a subconsultant we have that's going to give us a statistically significant sample of the population and give us some, insight into people's pain points for traveling, why they're traveling, some, costs and benefits and other things. We still have to figure out exactly what kind of questions we're going to be asking. But that's something that we haven't done in the past. And I think it's going to be really valuable for us to understand but not just where people are going, because we have a generally good idea of where people are going, but why and what their willingness to pay or to take different modes of transportation. And then in phase 3, we're hoping to further narrow down those broader set of scenarios and actually coalesce behind one service concept that we can eventually have our operations board adopt or recommend for adoption, because our parent commissions actually have to adopt the service plan. So when in this previous phase, we were looking at really 3 main areas that kind of, I'm sure you've seen that funnel infographic that everyone overuses. You've got all the balls in the funnel and they come down to a smaller set of balls. These were the balls, right? And we've been funneling rider sentiments. We've been doing analysis of origins and destinations in our service region, and then also taking a look at some existing planning paradigms. And really, I mean, when you start with the rider sentiments, now this is something we've historically been very good at, going out and talking to our riders and saying, what works, what doesn't, what do you like, what don't you like? And these are some of the real quotes and paraphrasing, paraphrases of real quotes that we ascertained from our riders. We did some actual tabling in the 4 stations inside the Beltway. And a number of these riders are, Fanport residents, right? And I think the one that really stood out to us because it was said so much, it's almost like people knew we were there and they were like, talking to each other, saying, okay, what are we going to say to the VRE folks? Because this one right here, I chose my home or work location based on accessibility for the organization. That was huge. It was like, of the people we, unscientifically surveyed, I'd say, more than a quarter of them, they specifically brought this up. So of the folks that are riding the area, it's a tremendous, economic opportunity for them to be able to access employment in DC, but through temporary. So, and then these are some of the other things. VRE riders kind of feel a kinship to each other. They feel part of the family, and they feel like generally our organization takes care of them. Well, that's great, but there aren't that many of them right now needing to get into DC. And so part of what the system plan is looking at is who are the people that don't necessarily feel part of the family for one reason or the other, and how can we attract them to the service? Because it's a good framework of service that we feel like we need to build on through 2050. And then, the things that we can't really control, right? So whereas a year ago, 2 years ago, we were saying, oh, what's going to happen with telework? Well, I think we generally are seeing these patterns, right? Most of our riders are choosing a 3-day in the office paradigm. And, the days, unsurprisingly, that they're choosing not to commute are Mondays and Fridays. And that's borne out by the surveys. We did 2 surveys in 2022. And we also just unscientifically asked folks, at stations, kind of, what are you doing? What's your current schedule? So this is real, right? This is regardless of people's personal opinions on the benefits or disbenefits of telework, this is what we're experiencing right now. We're also experiencing unequal recoveries on each line. So, and I'll show you this slide in a couple minutes, but Manassas line ridership has not come back at the same level that Fredericksburg has. Do you have a question?
Nick, I was just reading online, I think it was in the Washington Post, that Mayor Bowser in DC is saying to the federal government that they must use their buildings or give them up, because a lot of downtown DC business is suffering because the people aren't there. And so they're actually trying to strong arm the federal government and the federal government departments to say, if you're not going to first of all, tell your people to come back to the office. And B, if you're not going to tell your people to come back to the office, please allow your building to be either subleased or sold or used by somebody else, so that we don't have this vacuous empty space in downtown DC. Now, of course, whether or not she wins that argument, I don't know, and how long it takes for government to respond to that kind of a pressure. But certainly DC city is getting a little upset that they've got all this empty space leading to lower foot traffic at businesses in the district, and they're not going to stay quiet about it. So that may be a factor which changes this picture one more time in 6 months or a year from now.
Yeah, and we're seeing that, whereas before we used to rely on Office of Personnel Management to kind of, okay, what is quote unquote the federal government doing with respect to workforce policies? I think now we're seeing individual agencies making their own decisions, and that's having giving us a tremendous challenge from a planning perspective, because we just can't plan for one agency over the other. I mean, we have some big ones, and we carry a lot of their riders, or carry a lot of their employees, but it's been very difficult to plan. But that point is definitely something we're talking about. And I think this is something that I can't underscore enough. I mean, we've been looking at the data, and while it's too early to tell if it's a correlation or causation, there's definitely an effect that happened over the past couple of years when full facilities were opened on 95, what that did to our ridership. There are other things at play, so I can't say for certain if it's a definite causation, but we're really looking at what the new 66 outside the Beltway toll lanes are going to do to our Manassas line ridership. Because it's not just people doing SOV, right? It's also people taking advantage of the new transit options that are going to be running, that OmniRide's going to be running on those, new lanes. So.
Are you saying that your ridership drops when toll roads open?
No, I'm saying that
ridership goes up when toll roads open. I'm
saying that over the past, let's say 5 or 6 years, we've noticed variations in ridership, but we can't say for certain because there's a lot of other things. There's like the federal subsidy that people get for transit, there's gas prices, there's, winter storms, we had a number of government shutdowns at the beginning of the year, a couple years back. And so all of those things together, but that's kind of what phase 2 is going to look at more is, can we put a finer point on that and actually make some conclusions or conclusions about that? But just, we're keeping an eye on that because that really does, I mean, we know from our surveys that when folks don't take the training, but they still have to go into DC, they drive alone. That's our big competitor, right? So take that for what it is. And then, this is just a general overview of the zone system that we're analyzing. You'll notice that it doesn't just stay within the existing VRE service area, which is right in here. And that's because we want to assess the potential for future markets. And so what we've done is we've brought in all of Mark's territory. We brought in some known commuter markets out to Winchester. And then we've also said, let's take a look at Charlottesville and Richmond because we get asked all the time, well, hey, would it be feasible to run service down to Charlottesville or to Richmond? And so we want to answer that question, along with the run-through question that seems to be a perennial ask. And then these are just some of the existing planning paradigms that we've considered. I mean, what's old is new, right? I mean, the VRE 2040 system plan, which is the currently adopted plan since 2014. I mean, a lot of the stuff we're talking about today, which we were talking about in 2014. I mean, I don't think we're going to really deviate that far from any of these things. I mean, I think the board is generally comfortable going forward like this. It's just, what is the service going to look like? I think might look very different than what we thought it was going to look like in 2014. And just a quick note on, partner coordination. These are the localities and the entities that we had discussions with in phase 1. We had all the counties except for Stafford. We weren't able to make a Stafford meeting work, but we're hoping to coordinate with Stafford in round 2. We're going to be coming back in phase 2 for a second round of coordination with all these entities. So get ready. Once we get the consultant under contract, you're going to start seeing emails from us to set up conversations. And so, this is what we've been doing. Kind of importantly, and this is something that the VRE Operations Board generally supported and told us, okay, now you've got your vision, we support this, now go forward and do the analysis. But it's the VRE is going to grow to serve the region as a transportation service of choice by creating meaningful connections and economic opportunities in a safe, sustainable, and equitable. And we spent a lot of time internally developing this vision statement, but it's not just a throwaway statement. I mean, we were really going to stick to this when we screen potential alternatives, making sure that they promote environmental sustainability, that they're equitable, that we promote meaningful connections both to the transportation system and the transit system in both regions. And underpinning this vision are the 4 goals that the operations board also concurred with. Principally, it's the safety and reliability. I mean, VRE is a safety-focused organization. We're going to put safety and reliability above all else, but also how to balance market growth, growing the ridership, while also being fiscally prudent and maintaining financial stability in the long term. We've been very fortunate. We've been using federal support funding from the CARES, CRISA, and ARPA acts, but those funds have an end date, and it all depends on how quickly or slowly we draw them down. But we're going to have to figure out how we get over that potential fiscal shortfall in the next couple of years. And then, of course, regional system integration, equitable service, and sustainability and resiliency. And on these slides, I've detailed some of the potential targets and measures for each of these. In the interest of time today, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these next 4 slides because they're basically just the details underneath the 4 goals. But if there's any one of these goals that any of you all are interested in, we can talk about it in this forum now, or you can just email me afterwards and we can have a conversation. So I just put that out there to everyone before I go forward. I just don't want to brush over these goals. And now to the fun part. So these are just the 4 here. Looking at some historical trends. And as I said before, this is a pretty striking chart, but basically what it shows is just how severe of an impact COVID, and this was March of 2020, had on transit operations. You can see that prior to COVID, there was, Fredericksburg line was carrying more passengers than it had been for a long time. But generally speaking, what happened to one line happened to the other. So there were some, reductions in ridership here, 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 here. These things generally correlate with seasonal patterns. And then post start of COVID, you start to see this, as I mentioned before, a pulling away of the Fredericksburg line ridership from the Manassas line ridership. Now, this is just end of fiscal year 22. So we're going to have to bring in 23's data. So we will have updated data through hopefully most of the way through calendar year 23 by the time we finish this plan. So we hope to see kind of what that trend is doing, but it's kind of staying like this, right? I mean, just, anecdotally, but also looking at the APC data and the conductor count data. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or comments or questions about this ridership data. It's also helpful to see just the level of patronage relative to pre-COVID as of last summer.
It strikes me that certainly in our region, we've got VRE, OmniRide, Fred Transit, and Amtrak. And VRE is the one that's seen the longest sustained drop in ridership because of COVID. Fred is back up to pre-COVID levels, more or less. OmniRide, they're online, let them speak to their own figures. Amtrak is in Virginia at a higher level of ridership than pre-COVID. VRE is taking longer than the others to get back to pre-COVID levels. And I know that's got to do with federal government employees. So one understands the reason.
Yeah.
But it is the one transit mode in our region that is struggling more than the others in terms of ridership.
Yeah. And just the facts are we have almost a 70% federal or DoD ridership. Actually more than that, closer to 80 at this point. And so that plays a huge point.
So, well, one quick comment. It seems like the VRE ridership kind of mirrors very kind of closely to what I-95 is doing in terms of congestion. We talked about like with the express lanes, but like with the COVID effect during the AM and the PM rush hour, there's not as much congestion on 95. So I'm thinking that disproportionately hurts VRE relative to Fred and maybe some of the other modes.
Yeah.
When the congestion comes back in 95, I think the VRE ridership will come back.
And I think that's a very salient point because we heard from some of our riders, well, gee, I really, I do take it because I'm a habitual rider, but I really wish it would run at these times of day or these days of the week because congestion seems like it's almost worse then than it is when I come into work. And I think that's true. I mean, we're seeing, congestion happen all throughout the day, all throughout the week. And so one of the big elements of our system planning is as we can add capacity, because remember, we're constrained by the infrastructure, we're constrained by the agreements that we have with the Commonwealth. But as we can add new service, where is it the smartest to add? Is it in the peak or is it, at other times? And so that's going to kind of be, something we're looking at. But yes, I think it generally follows, and especially during COVID, that if, you needed to get into work, there is a likely chance that you gave the car a second look because it probably took less time than before COVID.
Have you guys done a similar analysis of station level data, at least for the Fredericksburg region? Is Spotsylvania or Fredericksburg or Brook or Leland stations, any of them doing better than the others compared to pre-COVID levels?
Fancy you ask. I'll skip this slide and go right to the meat. So this is a little bit challenging to read, but if you think purple is Spotsy, brown is Fredericksburg, and gray is Leland, right? So this is basically the three main stations, and then Brook is right here, right? So these are the FAMPO stations, and this is kind of what's going on with respect to station level boardings in the AMP. Obviously, you see kind of a little bit of a shuffle up here when Spotsy opened back in November 15. It did take a lot of ridership from Fredericksburg and Leland. But then as we're coming out of the, coming out of COVID and into the summer and into late summer here of last year, Spotsylvania has had the fastest return to ridership. And it's actually right now, and I think this is still the case, I don't think Fredericksburg has surpassed it, but it's carrying the most or it's seeing the most ons and offs of any station in the region. And it makes sense, right? Longest trips, the trips that are most painful if you had to drive your own car all the way to DC. And so I think it's a good value for the folks that live in the Spotsy area that are close driving distance to the station. So yeah, this is basically what's been going on in the AM inbound. And then just going back to this previous slide here, Fridays are really emerging, and I think that Fridays have always been a weak ridership day, just because that's historically been the day, if you're able to telework, that you would, right? And so this isn't a new trend, right? It's not like, oh my gosh, Fridays were great, now they're not. But the level of difference, a percent difference between Tuesday, which is typically our highest ridership day, and Friday has really started to gap. And so what that's suggesting is that with the folks that are returning to transit, returning to work, Friday is the preferred, telework day. And I mean, that makes sense. I don't need to explain why that's the case. Get an early jump on the weekend. So any questions on this chart here?
Yeah, just as go ahead, Paul.
Are you surprised that Monday is as high as it is?
Yeah, I kind of am. But I think it's one of those things where you might see, like especially in this region, folks only being allowed to work from home 1 day a week, or they're choosing to only work from home 1 day a week. I think the Fredericksburg lines seem to have more, at least anecdotally, when we spoke with folks at the stations, more of the, I can't telework at all. I got, my job is essential. I need to be at the Pentagon, or I need to be wherever. And so if they are given at least 1 day, I think, Friday tends to be that day. So.
And just a quick note, based on people that I know, they work every other Friday because they lengthen their days somehow. So that may be another contribution anecdotally as to why Fridays are so much lower for federal employees. So
here's something, I'll just throw a little landmine into this. I reverse commute, right? I've moved out of the Fampo region to an apartment elsewhere, and I reverse commute, and I use the train sometimes. So 1 day a week, usually I take the train, and a couple of days I take the car, etc. It depends on what's happening. Do you know I take Amtrak because I'm reverse commuting, because you can't reverse commute on VRE? Here's the thing that totally blew my mind. Amtrak often beats me driving on the I-95, and I don't drive slowly. I won't on the record say what that looks like, but all I'll say is when I'm pulling into the parking lot here, Amtrak is toot toot leaving for destinations further south. If I and my Jaguar on the I-95 cannot beat Amtrak time-wise, the public don't realize that the trains can actually be faster as well as the other benefits. I put my laptop in front of me on the table and I work sending emails to staff so that when they get into the office, their inbox already has a bunch of like, where's this report? Can you do that? Find out about that. So the staff know when I'm taking the train, because they get much earlier emails than if I take the car. VRE is not as quick as Amtrak for two reasons. The one is that they stop more frequently. Amtrak only stops at like 5 major stations, whereas VRE stops at a whole bunch. So Amtrak just does Fredericksburg, Quantico, Woodbridge, Alexandria, and then into the district, whereas VRE stops at a bunch of, Spotsylvania, the 2 Stafford stations, etc. So, and the other thing is, I noticed that the VRE locomotives seem to be a little slower than the Amtrak ones. The point I'm making is the speed of the service might also have something subtly to do with the ridership. If it takes longer, people might be choosing to jump on Amtrak and pay more, although the step-up ticket is no longer available as an option. But you can on Amtrak buy monthly passes or 10 trip passes.
And just one word on the step-up. So our upper management's actively in discussions with Amtrak to try to, and the Commonwealth, to try to restart the step-up program. So, no definitive timeline on that, but the intention is to offer the step up to a broader range of trains than pre-pandemic. And so that would be something, again, no guarantees of timeline or anything because it still has to come through Amtrak subject to our operating agreement with them. But we see that as, at least in the near term, of if you're already a VRE multi-ride pass holder, like a monthly or a 10 trip, you'll be able to buy a step up ticket and utilize those services. So that's and we're gonna be closely, when we're able to make that work, we're gonna be closely analyzing the ridership on those trains and understand what the potential demand is, because if there's strong demand, if we're putting a bunch of our riders on an Amtrak train, well, that implies that perhaps in the future, when we have the ability to run our own service at that time, we might be able to make something work. So, but yeah.
We'll let everybody ask the rest of their questions at the end.
Okay.
We did a lot more time for next, so just in case people were asking, but we've only got a couple more slides, so.
Yep, yeah, so I'll just finish these here. So we saw this one. And then this is just a percent ridership recovery by station. Now, this is July 2022 compared to February 2020. And, basically what I'm saying here is Spotsylvania has seen the fastest recovery to quote unquote normal pre-pandemic normal of all the stations on the Fredericksburg line.
I have a question. Based on the ridership, pre-COVID, the number dropped, right? Do you have data about what kind of jobs that drop? The reason I'm asking this is maybe more important for the localities, planners. When a business comes to the county or to the city, they can understand that this is going to be communication. Is that they can count for the growth in the county, in the city, in terms of housings and stuff like that. Do you have any ideas if you?
Yeah, so, by and large, we carry federal workforce. That's basically 7 out of 10, at least 7 out of 10 of our riders. About 6 out of 10 of them, I believe last I checked, get the federal transit subsidy. And almost all of them have some ability to telework, maybe not regularly, but on an ad hoc basis. And so our ridership is an extremely desk job heavy, ridership. That's not to say that there aren't other folks doing other things. There's some, one-off ridership, people going to the airports and the train station up in Union Station. But generally speaking, that's the patronage. So it's mostly professional, mostly federal and DoD. And then, one final slide before I go into the next steps here. You guys seem interested in this kind of stuff, so let me zoom out here so I can. This is the same. Whoops, not that much. This is the same slide, the ridership slide. But what I've done is layered over all of the different potential external factors that folks know have some impact on transit ridership and our ridership in particular. And so you can see situations where we had a fare increase, and that's required as part of the master agreement. We increased our step-up tickets. You can see the federal transit benefit amount, how much folks are eligible to get as that has gone up, and also some of the major regional disruptions, like we had a 35-day government shutdown in January 19. We had a big blue and yellow line shutdown in Alexandria and Franconia and Fairfax in the summer of 19, and a few other things. So again, we can't say right now causation, correlation, but it's just helpful to see this, over a longer period of time, and to start to say, well, maybe we need to investigate this. We know. Look, one of the biggest drops in ridership pre-COVID was during this big 35-day government shutdown. We had furloughed employees; they weren't going into work. It was one of the longest shutdowns in the last, 10 years or 15 years. And because our ridership is so heavily federal, that had a major impact on top of an already low typical ridership level in December, January. People take vacation and all that. So just wanted to show you all that. And if you have more questions, we can talk about it at the end. Last slide here. What's next? So we're going to complete the ridership projections and market assessment for what we're calling like the baseline scenario. So that's like if we only do what Transforming Around Virginia allows us to do through 2030, and then basically held the service constant for another 20 years, what kind of ridership can we expect? We'll refine that based on things like gas prices, tolls, the elasticity of demand and all that. And then we're going to be developing several action service scenarios. So those will be, I'm not even going to speculate as to what they are because I don't want to presuppose the planning process, but you can use your imagination as to what people might come up with and what we might analyze. And then obviously the robust public outreach effort to non-riders. And we're going to continue reaching out to you all. I might come back in a couple months with an update presentation after we've had a chance to go to the board once or twice and give you some updates on where we are. But that's generally where we are, and that's the presentation. So,
All right, questions for Nick?
One last question. I notice FAMPO isn't specifically a stakeholder to your work. If FAMPO members or FAMPO committee members want to give comment or input to your process, how can they do that?
You can either do it through our scheduled discussions at the locality level, or, to be honest, this group is, pretty informal and congenial, generally speaking. So I figured, well, if, anyone has specific comments for me, I'm going to be here every month, once a month. And so if you want to pull me aside and, lodge some formal comments or recommendations, happy to talk before or after one of these meetings. So, yeah.
For us at FAMPO, one of the key things we're considering over the next 6 months is how in the future do we make the trade-off between investing in widening all of our roadways versus what other options are available. And clearly one of the options available is transit, and VRE is one part of that transit matrix. So, if the FAMPO committees want to discuss, do we really want to widen every single road in FAMPO, or do we want to widen some roads, build 2 new roads, and put some more money into transit? How do we do that? So those conversations I expect to happen over the next 6 months at FAMPO, and people may want to comment on that. Individual jurisdictions tend to focus on their specific local individual jurisdiction issues, and that's fine. That's what they're meant to do. And FAMPO tries to, and it's made up of jurisdictions and other state partners and so on. But at FAMPO, we try to bridge the gap between those jurisdictions so that it's not just about my jurisdiction, but it's like, how does this line up with all the other jurisdictions? And regionalism. As a region, is there anything we can do? But we can look, if you have a survey again, I guess members can get involved with that, and also we could make FAMPO written comments to you as well, I guess.
And one other thing I'll say in phase 3, so that's like after the summer of this year, when we have a general service concept that we want to flesh out some more, that might allow us to have more specific station area or land use related discussions. Now, again, we already can't control, what happens at the stations or outside of the station, actual station property. But, we can certainly be talking with each individual locality and understand what their plans are for the station. And I think a lot of it's going to be an education of, well, here's the kind of service that is going to potentially be here by 2030 and by 2050. And if it's a level of intensity that's conducive to a more intense or a more productive land use, we're going to want to talk about that and just understand. We don't want to miss any opportunities here because we're all in the same boat, and you only get one chance to develop land for 100 years, basically. So, and we're not moving the rail line, so it's going to be where it is 100 years. Anything else? Okay. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, next item up is item B, FAMPO Interregional Multimodal East-West Mobility Study Phase 2, and I'll turn that over to Foley. Is that you?
We just wanted to show where the responses are to the roadway report. So if you look up there, Coley's going to walk you through how the public are responding in the survey that we're doing. And it just gives you a quick snapshot of how we are doing so far. Bearing in mind that this report is still out for public comment, it's not closed yet. And so this is just a work in progress or process. We've had 654 responses as of right now. So this is live. This is literally live this morning, right now, in fact. You're looking at the back end of the survey to just see what the public are saying. So I'll leave it to Coley to show you.
Thank you. We have 6 questions that we asked on this survey, and I've printed off some flyers for you all to take with you. So based on the report's findings, which the roadway corridors most need to be upgraded or widened, and this is the breakdown here. So we have 13 options as well as none of the above. So at the moment, Plank Road and Warrenton Road have the highest options, and you're allowed to choose three different options. Then in addition,
What is the third one? Just
highest, Garrison
Garrison
Road, West 595.
okay.
And then we have an open-ended question about congestion managing options, what we should look into other than, or in addition to widening roads. So this is just 466 people have written in their answers. So that's pretty good for an optional question. And yeah, so there's tons of different things people have said. And then, do you support the development of a new river crossing bridge west of I-95 between Central Park and Southern Stafford? We have 523 yeses, 131 no's. Should the region invest in development of a new I-95 interchange at Gordon Shelton Boulevard, Central Park, Harrison Road, both or neither?
But definitely a majority you can see are saying one or the other or both. Massive majority, neither is a small 34% are saying no, we don't want any more access onto the I-95.
Was this only one selection question?
Yes.
So wouldn't it be saying, I guess it's neither is the highest? Or am I reading that wrong?
Well, no, what I'm saying is that if you compare, just go back to the,
Oh, if you're selecting one or the other.
yeah, if you're saying who wants more access onto the I-95 and who doesn't, well, only 34% don't. 32% want both, and a big chunk want one or the other. So there's a lot of people who would prefer some additional way to get onto the I-95. What that way is, we'll have to see if it's workable, but that's at least what the public is saying.
Sure. Then the next 2 questions are about pedestrian bicycle paths. One to connect Fall Hill Avenue and Central Park to the Spotsylvania Town Center. No's 164 and yeses 490. And then the second, Kings Highway and Chatham Heights Road for a bicycle and pedestrian path. It's pretty similar, so only two differences. 492 for yes and 162 for no. And then we have some demographics or any additional feedback questions. So right now we have, this is a breakdown of gender or prefer not to say, and then indicate if you identify it under any of these. So
The reason we ask those questions is, apart from helping us understand the needs of our local people, we're also required federally to report demographics of who we engage with. So I forget Coley, but it's every second or third year, we have to compile the data of who FAMPO is engaged with, who we've got responses from, who have completed our surveys, who has come to our meetings and spoken. And we have to try to establish whether they represent minority communities, whether they are senior citizens, low income people. So attached this to our surveys for that purpose. It's not because we, just interested in people's private lives. It's because we federally required to keep track of whether we do engage with minorities, whether we do engage with senior citizens and disabled folks and so on. One other thing on this particular issue, just wanted to clarify, Fotsy had suggested that we ask the consultant to look at the widening of Harrison Road as an access to a potential new interchange. Do you still want us to proceed with that? We sent back an email saying, could you indicate which portion of Harrison Road? So if we could just get a response, then I'll just also tell the policy committee that and then reaffirm it with the consultant.
Okay.
Sounds like that's good. I think.
Can we go back to
question
4 for just a second?
Sure.
The additional exits. How were just those ones, and I'm new on this, but how were just those 4 options created?
In the roadway report by the consultants.
So yeah, the roadway report itself looks at those specific options, and then we just created do you want both? Do you want neither? Just to get the public's opinion. I found it's very useful to give the public always an option of no, or none of the above, or I don't want it, or I don't want transit, for example, because we otherwise make this assumption that everybody wants something. Well, maybe they don't. Maybe they don't want us to spend the money. So we put the neither option always, and then we thought both as, just to get just more granularity as to what the public really thinks. We put 4 options instead of 3. But the 2 intersections are what we asked the consultant to investigate.
And at the very top, when you take the survey, you can find the roadway report there. So
So I know in our transportation master plan that we're working on, when we get the draft plan back in the fall, pretty sure it's going to show some advantages to having an interchange at Truslow and or at American Legion in Stafford.
We haven't asked our consultant to investigate those options, but it's certainly something that we can look at. It's not a.
Good, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Remind everybody the survey is still open. So if you have not touched base with your social media people or your jurisdiction or your agency, please help share the word on this. I know the city has recently done that, but that's because I asked.
There you go. Tony, will you pass those around? Because I think people might leave earlier than others.
All right, we'll keep moving on.
John's behind you.
Oh, there you are. Look at that magic coming.
While we're pulling up that thing for John, if just by way of introduction, we did on Friday receive John, if I can just do a brief introduction. We did on Friday receive the cost estimate validation responses from VDOT to many of the projects that were asked. They did not make any comments on recent smart scale applications that have already recently got a cost estimate. The style of the responses is kind of long form prose. In other words, it doesn't say, yes, we agree with this cost estimate, or no, add another 10%. Unfortunately for us at FAMPO, because we have to deal with those responses. Many of the responses contain questions, right? Did you include the bike lane, or did you include whatever in your cost estimate? And they're written in long form prose, which means that we have to study them to work out whether this is generally supportive of the cost estimate submitted by the applicant or not. It's not as simple as, oh yes, tick, it's done, right? So that's unfortunate for us as staff, because now we're going to have to engage with the applicant on a whole range of questions that lead up to that cost estimate, which means it's a cumbersome process. And when John is finished today, I think you'll probably all agree that our methodology which was created by a subcommittee of the TAC about a year ago, it needs some tweaking. It is difficult to implement. It leaves some questions unclear. I'll give you a quick example. For transit applications, very difficult to apply some of the generic line items that apply to roadways. Yet transit is not treated separately in the, for example, in the initial screening in process. There's no difference between the modes. They're all the same. But some of the things for transit, Jamie keeps emailing me, rightly so, to say, well, who must the letter of support come from? And it's not clear, because is it the board of PTAB? Is it the localities board? Is it? It's difficult to determine who that letter must come from. For example, because the policy just says you must get a letter from the jurisdiction. Well, in the case of a bus route or a new bus, there isn't one jurisdiction for a new bus, for example. The bus has to go anywhere. So we need to tweak a bunch of things in there, and some of the questions. Anyway, you'll see at the end of the process that it's not as easy to use this methodology, and we're going to need to do some tweaks in due course, and we'll get to that. So what you're seeing today is the initial first blush scores, and it's a new methodology, and both John and Connor, who did the scoring, are new to staff at FAMPO, which is good and bad. It's really good because it's objective. They have no skin in the game. I mean, because I've been here 2 years, you might even start to say, I've got some skin in the game. Well, they don't. They did the scoring. I just looked at it at the end to understand what they did. But they're completely neutral, objective, have no particular axe to grind. They haven't been here long enough to develop an axe. Secondly, they've applied it strictly according to what the text says, which means they wouldn't necessarily understand the nuance that we as members of the TAC meant to convey when we were writing that thing. They just take it as it reads. So if you find there's some things which came out quite as you had hoped, maybe that's because the text doesn't clarify, and we're going to need to review that text in some cases. Without any further ado, John, if you could just run us through that.
Okay, I'm gonna run everything through basically by the scoring, both mode and section. Of course, we're assuming that if you submitted something for cost validation to VDOT, that we're assuming that's 5 points, that may be changing as that comes in and we review it. That's the only kind of item that we're aware of that points have been awarded or the final lines.
And I know this is going to be hard for this group, but save your questions to the end, because if not, we will be here all day on one person's project. And we're not going to do that. So save your questions to the end. Please write them down.
So for run rate scoring, I'll make a couple of quick different things clear just for the score criteria that's going to kind of affect everybody. One, we want to note that every single item scoring criteria was a factor of 0 to 10 points. Okay, every single thing was 0 to 5, except for detailed engineering and detailed cost estimates. They were 5 points each, depending kind of yes or no on that criteria. After those 10 points there's also basically a percentage weighted apply. So even though you might score 10 points on one item that had a very low percentage points and score 6 points on another that had a very high percentage point weight, you could actually have earned more points coming out from a lower score than if you scored 10 points somewhere else. In addition, a couple of the categories have basically competitive ranks, so it depends on where you score within that category. Other ones are yes, no, or based on a metric that says if you reach a certain threshold, you're going to earn X amount of points. So that's the way that we scored it. And I included the raw scores, so you can actually go through 1 to 10 to see where it ranked, and then to see as we apply the weighting factor to see how things then also do. So depending on how strong that weighting factor is, not all the points. And in a weird little item that because detailed cost estimates and detailed engineering is broken up in kind of 2 5-point sections, when you get down to the weighted score, it kind of creates a weird 1.5 if you add it up across the row, but actually it's a factor of about 100%. So it's actually 100%, although if you add up everything, it's 105. It's kind of a weird quirk in these things. So in the CMAQ roadway scoring, our top scoring project was the I-95 Route 1 exit 126 interchange, Part D, the preliminary engineering for that project. It was followed by the South Point Road Route 1 intersection configuration. US 1 and Lake Hill Road finished in third, Leland Road finished in fourth, and Route 124 finished in fifth. I will say that at least within the scoring methodology, there is a heavy bias towards volume. So basically, as the project had a higher and higher volume of the roadways, that drove most of the scoring. Because the NOx and volatile organic compounds or carbons, it was a flat rate. So basically, the more you had, basically the more ability you had to reduce that. Trying to think if there's any other items. Oh, also with the NOx and VOCs, the way that the Federal Highway Toolkit that we did to not analyze every single of the projects assumes a 4-way intersection. Basically, every single project here is a T intersection or a variation of a T intersection. So we applied this methodology assuming that it was still a 4-way intersection. So quietly, it would inflate everything that wasn't. The the South Point reconfiguration that basically kind of resulted in almost 2 T intersections, give or take, just oversimplifying there. And that would probably be the one that probably had the most kind of potential, not a clear one-to-one. That was probably the one that had most issues trying to bring this together. But considering that it maxed out the points, we didn't feel that this actually hurt the project in scoring, although it was probably underestimating the NOx and VOC reduction, but it blew out the scale.
And
Just a comment to the group. John is telling you this, and I just want to emphasize it. The tool, the federal tool that we are required to use in terms of the methodology only applies to 4-way intersections. It doesn't have an option for 3-way intersections. So we had to apply it, but if you don't like the outcome, change the tool, right? We use the tool, but it does not have an option for 3-way intersections.
And let me modify my statement. Once we finish the first 3 slides of CMAQ, then we'll do questions and then SWD, because I don't want to stick it to. Sorry.
Basically, in that, it's assuming a 4-way intersection. There's a ghost arm that is assuming that there's additional VOC and NOx reductions happening that aren't actually there. So, but it applies to every single project because they're all variations of the T intersection. Okay, CMAQ and transit. So what we see here is actually a pretty good example of how the weighting can kind of affect the raw score. So the Stafford Transit Hub actually had a lower raw score than a lot of the other ones. But if you look at greenhouse gas reductions, it's 40% of the total. So scoring slightly higher is a pretty big advantage. We also looked at alternatives to single occupancy vehicle based on the scoring criteria, and that settled itself out. Basically, if you're doing big regional I-95 trips, you're going to score higher as well. Replacement vehicles and new vehicles scored fairly similar. I think they kind of diverged on project impact because the replacement vehicles were technically a little bit cheaper. The Route 17 bus scored pretty well on some of the other metrics, but it was kind of dragged down by the single occupancy vehicles and greenhouse gas reduction, considering that they result in almost 2/3 of the points. So that's where you can kind of see the scales, kind of the percentage weights of some of the criteria kind of really kind of changing how some of the projects scored overall. For CMAQ, active scoring criteria, this was a lot, so bear with me. We saw a pretty significant project score pretty well on the NOx reduction to VOC reduction. The reduced occupancy vehicle is a very interesting criteria within this. If you read through the methodology, it says a transition based on the ambient roadway within the average BMTs of the roadway within a half-mile radius. It says to multiply it by a 0.05%, not 5%, 0.05%. So in order to score any points on that factor, you would actually have to have an average roadway network around the project of over 40,000 vehicles a day. So, Route 3 might be able to definitely score points there, Route 17, up until you add the other roadways within the half mile. And all of a sudden that drags the average down. So no project actually scored for reducing SOV, but you could earn 2 points to being within a transit stop within a certain radius. All projects have those, so that was good. So we got 2 points there, but that was a pretty big impact because that was a quarter of all points available. So we weren't actually able to create separation from the projects on that. Another item that we had some questions on is we did separation as a safety item. Considered if it was grade separated or outside the clear zone as being completely separated. There's a physical barrier, so a guide rail or a concrete structure that would travel lanes and the facility to be 6 points. And then if there was some other treatment that offered a visual delineation but no actual physical change or physical containment or prevent vehicle penetration, would offer it as 2 points. And then leverage funding also kind of had a significant impact on some of the scoring because a lot of projects scored really well, but there's a little bit less separation. So the small bits of points were starting to be a little bit more relevant to that. So,
John.
All right, is that up for CMAC?
that is up for CMAC.
Okay, so I'll turn it over to the group for questions for CMAC projects only. Go ahead.
In terms of working through issues on the projects, I know you probably saw my emails on the separation stuff. Is that for conversation today or we work that out?
So if you have kind of general questions, ask them today. We are asking each applicant, there are 4 applicants, the 3 jurisdictions and Fred Transit, to go through your scores and give us a list of the things that you think we need to have another look at. We can then spend some time having another look at that. John and Connor will review each of your lists of questions, and then we'll come back to you with responses to those. So very detailed stuff, put it in that list and we'll come back to you. If it's more general questions that are going to affect more than just yourself, please ask them, because we certainly think that the methodology needs some tweaking. As you saw, reducing SOV, all of them scored 0 because the metric that was designed a year ago is not sensitive enough. It just scored everything 0.
Is there room to say that was almost certainly a typo in the methodology? That should be 5%.
It's for you all to decide. I just apply the methodology as it is now and suggest some changes and improvements that we should make because it doesn't give us always great outcomes.
Paul?
Madam Chair, I had a question on transit.
Sure.
The question was with regards to the cost estimates. I know there were some questions with the Frederick cost estimates and what constituted a validated cost estimate. Can you just briefly explain how the 2 kind of got validated and the other 2 did not, even though they're all Fred?
Okay, yes. So for the vehicles, so basically all the vehicles, at least on a base level, there exists, you can buy a state contract. You can say that there is let's say 25% cutaway chassis with a very fundamental level of treatment. So it's going to probably specify engine size, a couple other things, but whether or not it has motorized mirrors, that's a different thing. But we can at least say, okay, there's a base cost. We can kind of look at that quickly akin to a VDOT cost estimate that says it's going to get us fairly close on at least some level of expectations that It exists.
It's a language issue in the criteria ultimately. It says DRPT approved cost estimate or something similar. So even though I know what the cost is for our hours of service, or I know what the cost is to build a transit hub because HRT has one that looks just like the Stafford one, I can't use that.
So the DRPT published cost
It's something I can use.
is fixed because that's what they, if you get a bus funded, they will go and purchase it for you at the standard rate. The trouble with that is that those rates, they vary with each batch of buses they buy. They'll buy 10 this month, it'll come at X. They might buy 20 next month and it'll be slightly less or slightly more. And there's no way we can even know what that is till you actually buy the bus. It's a very, transit in our methodology needs a little bit of tweaking generally because there are lots of metrics which I think have been borrowed from the roadway section, which don't quite work with transit. It's very difficult. We found it difficult to score the transit projects because the methodology is too generic. It needs to be more specific for transit.
So as somebody who's bought transit vehicles on state contract, I mean, the base rate's a good way to kind of start as an estimate or cost estimate. But for example, if like the transit or the vehicle on state contract, if it's like a paratransit van, does it have a sliding door or versus a driver actuated like transit door? That might be a cost thing that moves it, but then we're talking about basically a kind of a custom order and upfitting of an existing vehicle that's already on state contract. So the amount the needle will move is probably relatively minor, but we can at least say, okay, there is a cost estimate for a base vehicle and it's from DRPT on state contract. Therefore, it's a valid cost estimate. Because even though our cost estimates, even with there might be movement even post cost estimate, just the way that there would be for a vehicle order in this case.
I think the point is for this slide in front of you, for the vehicles, we have a cost estimate published by DRPT. The other two projects, we don't necessarily have a published cost and honestly, my response is we should tweak the methodology on this particular item. It's not helpful. It gives you, as you can see, it gives you a funny outcome, and we need a better way of doing that.
One question.
About, I assume you said these scored prior to getting your information from VDOT.
Yes.
So I would guess that some of the detailed engineering and detailed cost estimate scores might adjust.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we assume if they submitted a project for cost estimate, during the phase that we reopened it, if they did not have one, we assumed that they were going to get one. Yes, so we just assumed yes to go ahead and pull it. So the only way that the scores will move if y'all come back and say, no, that's not we don't validate that cost estimate, so they'll lose the order of level. Yeah.
Even that question itself, guys, the methodology says that VDOT or DRPT has to validate cost estimates, but the methodology doesn't say how exactly we're supposed to get access to VDOT or DRPT validating the cost estimate itself. Do you have to submit it to them 3 months in advance? Does FAMPO need to? It kind of implies that the applicant must get it from VDOT or DRPT, the methodology, but it's really something we need to clarify in this document. And my suggestion is you should submit it in advance to VDOT and DRPT to validate the cost, or we must find a different method to validate the cost estimate, because it's very difficult to do it at the last minute because everybody's busy, right? And you quickly submit your project, but the cost estimate hasn't been validated. So now it starts a whole drama, and VDOT's responses on these cost estimates, unfortunately, are complicated. They're not simple. And I say, unfortunately, from an administrative perspective, for us to administer, it's difficult now because we're now going to get on each applicant and I have a whole series of to and fro to try and, you've got to answer questions. Did you include the gutter or not, or whatever the heck it is, right? We think your cost estimate is too low, but did you include 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in it or not, right? We don't know the answers to those questions, and we have to already have finished the score, so it's messy.
And it doesn't mean that your project can't move forward, just as a reminder, it just means you don't get the point.
You just don't get the points,
Yeah.
yeah. But we have to try and make that objective somehow. And it's like a rabbit hole. The closer you look at it, the more you have to ask more questions, and the more you have to go back to the applicant, and we can't have that normally. It's happening now, but there should be a better way of doing this in advance, so we don't have this now kind of asking all these questions about the project this late in the game.
Can the PAMBO make it like clear to the localities to use VDOT source of unit cost maybe or something? So they have uniform
Well,
numbers?
yeah, we do need to review the document to say, how is this going to work in future? But the document currently says the applicant must provide proof of VDOT validated cost estimate. That's the way it is now, but it didn't work this time because most people didn't provide that. So we as staff are not here to punish anybody. We're just trying to administer this methodology as best we can. So we don't want to now, I mean, we could have thrown out 70% of the projects after the first round because there were issues, and we won't do that. We're trying to work with, it's a new methodology. There are teething problems. We're just trying to do it the best we can this time around. But we do think an adjustment is necessary to the methodology.
Maybe within the next 1 to 2 FAMPO meetings, it'd be a good idea to have a list together of topics or things that need to be changed.
We agree. We are already working on that. As soon as we can finish with the scores, we will then draw up a list of what we think should change.
And would that go to like a working group or something in the next 6 to 12 months, or?
I wasn't going to answer the question now, but
Okay.
my answer to the question, Madam Chair, is that we need to reconstitute the subcommittee that actually worked on it last time, even though there might be 1 or 2 new members, so that the whole TAC doesn't have to sit and argue about whether it's 30% NOx or not, right? So I think we should have a small working group to just review the categories where we've picked up these problems in administering it. Sometimes it's just a clarification. Did you mean A or B, right? It's not clear to us whether you meant A or B. Sometimes it's what you did say doesn't actually work. Sometimes, as Matthew points out, it's maybe that the comma is in the wrong place. I hate to score a project based on a comma, right? But is it 0.5% or 0.05% that you meant, or what did you mean? And I think we need to those are the things we need to clarify. So I would suggest we reconstitute the subcommittee just to look at improvements to the new methodology.
Sounds good. All right, that'll be our action item post this meeting, but we can go on to the STBG projects.
Surface transportation block, right. Roadway draft scoring. So again, the scoring for STBG is just like CMAC. It has a very strong bias towards volume on the road. So basically, the more volume there is on the roadway or the roadway, the much higher likelihood that this project is going to score. So you had, again, exit 126 in the South Point interchange, kind of leading the project. You had the US 1 and Lakeville and Stafford County coming up in third, followed by I-95. So projects, I'd actually say that, like, some cases, you can definitely see with like Whitlow and the GHLK, whereas it's a lot lower volume. Basically, it's very hard for some of these projects to score points, just because the volume is not warranted. That's how biased some of the methodology is, because basically volume is going to draw from the change in the level of service, the severity, whether or not it's on a corridor, crash frequency is going to drive, crash severity is going to drive that as well. So basically, the only things that is somewhat volume dependent is the detail engineering and leverage funding. So there wasn't really anything completely shocking about the scoring outside of this, other than one of the recommendations we'll probably go through is for safety and crash thing. It's just counting what's existing within a buffer. It's not actually factoring in whether or not the treatment's going to provide an improvement. So that's probably something that we want to hold on in the future, but that's for another time. But there was really nothing kind of surprising. You definitely just saw volume kind of driving the scores. For transit, again, it's actually very similar scoring. I think the difference here was project impact more or less, just because the lower the cost, the higher it's going to score. But we saw a very similar scoring process for both the replacement vehicles and amenities. The difference is one the 70 project, the other one's a little bit more. And that there was a little bit of, even with that, even having false estimates, so nothing shocking here. Then for the SDVG studies, there's criteria that scores everything well. It would be this, because for planning factors, you just have to check one out of like about 8 or 9 factors. So if you hit one, you get full 2 points. Long range planning is pretty self-explanatory. Planning application support, so if it's going to go to another smart scale or be applied towards another round of STVG or CMAC, it's going to get the points. VTrans needs probably where things kind of separated a little bit more, but even then it was completely. And then leverage funding actually had a big impact on the scoring criteria here. FAMPO did not score the river crossing engineering study because that's also in the pool to potentially compete for projects. We do not have a active transportation eligible project. The one that was submitted for, we did kind of just review just to see how the methodology is working. So how it would have scored, but unfortunately it's not eligible because it's outside the TMA. But we scored it just to see, okay, is this working as a focus? So we are presenting the draft scoring script. So there's likely some of the feedback cost estimates is going to go in. Like staff is basically validating its own scoring. I think there's been a request to see kind of our worksheets and everything. We're going to provide that once we get into the have a finalized scoring and when we start talking about allocations. So you'll see that, but we're still planning and trying to find any errors that we might have caught here because yes, later there's an error in CX stuff. So, but that'll be coming up for March. So we're going to have to receive the FY29 budgets from VDOT, and then we'll have that to the TAC by at least the March. You'll have basically what we call our scoring journal, where we really have the scoring items, methodologies. If we made any notes about something, you'll have that information as well as the full scoring spreadsheets.
John, should we just ask VDOT if there's any feedback on when we're likely to get the Y29 CMAC and SGGB budget amounts?
I don't have any.
So those would be our next steps. We'll also be going through existing projects and criteria. We're already starting to kind of scan and review that. Just a quick point, I flipped these, fortunately, there should be inverted. This one should be 5 million, this one should be just under 4 million here, so sorry about that. So before we actually go and add new projects, we have to look at our existing projects to see eligibility. And keep in mind that I know that there's a large amount of requests potentially coming in, but projects are capped in total amount of funding. So if they've already received a lot, if not most or all, they might not be eligible for additional funding, as well as any one project cannot receive more than a specific given amount per year. So even though if you're requesting a certain amount, you might only get up to an amount per year for that. So. And of course, you can also kind of move money around. So we're also factoring in cost increases. So there's a separate methodology. There's a methodology for screening in, there's a methodology for scoring, and then there's a methodology for allocation. So we are now beginning the allocation kind of survey right now. So for cost increases, if it's up to 10%, you just need to notify the TAC chair as well as the AMPO administrator that that's requesting potentially a 10%.
Just if I can chip in there to the presentation, John, this is another item in the methodology which needs clarification. It doesn't say 10% of what. And so if we try to make that call as staff, we're going to decide what to apply the 10% to. Is it a 10% increase to the total cost of the project? Is it a 10% increase to the amount you requested? Because in the larger projects, the jurisdiction never asks for 100% of the money. They ask for some lower amount. So which of the two amounts, for example, do we apply the 10% to? If you understand my reasoning. So what we need to clarify in the methodology, and this is why the subcommittee would be helpful, is to tweak that so we have a specific language in there that says 10% of the total project cost or 10% of the amount you asked for. You see, it's different.
Or 10% of the 50%, you can't get more than 50%.
Exactly, exactly. So we need clarity because technically we can't actually apply it right now because we'd have three answers, not one answer to the question.
Sure.
And of course, if it's more than 10%, then it kind of almost quasi re-triggers a re-analysis of viability of the project. So if it's looking like a huge one, that means we'll bring it back to you and say, okay, does the project need to be scaled back? Does the shortfall need to be using local funds? There's the reserve amounts, or I mean, it can be all the way to the point of where you say, we want to drop this project.
And the question I have as the FAMPA administrator is, if it's more, do we give it the 10%? And then go and ask for these other methods to be applied, or do we not give it the 10%? Do we, because it says I have to take it to the policy committee to request a further direction on what to do if it's more than the 10%, right? Well, so do I allocate it the 10% or do I not? It's not 100% clear as to whether I should anyway allocate the 10% and then for the rest ask the policy committee what to do, or do I not allocate the 10% and ask the policy committee what to do? And so we should clarify that. I don't like to have to interpret things like that because it can get very acrimonious if you don't like the way I've interpreted it. I would rather that the methodology just says, do the following 3 steps, then I'll do the following 3 steps, right? Then I don't have to personally ruin your project. Should hate me. It's not, it's hate the methodology if you like, but preferably not me.
So at this point in time, I mean, we have just begun going through the existing CMAQ and FTBG projects and identifying which projects would be eligible to receive additional fundings in the future years. So we are basically going through survey and both the good and challenging thing is we had to go back and review every single application that would be potentially eligible back to see what they actually submitted within the first round when they applied for CMAQ and were awarded. So if, for example, if it was a $1 million project, but you only requested $100,000 and we gave you $100,000, you're actually not eligible to come back and ask for more other than the 10% cost increase. If you kind of left it potentially open-ended or it's unclear, then it might be something that you could go back and ask. But again, this would be something probably for a more at-length conversation, because if we only partially funded bigger ask, then you're definitely eligible to come back and ask for more. Get more of it funded up to how the rules specify, but you have to notify us as well, so.
So we're working on the estimate update for some of the criteria of it. We also got this putting in on Market Street that it came Friday. Be able to.
Thanks. Thank you.
And there might be some that here
We've also sent this list to Susan last week to say, can you just clarify that it is the correct list?
And that's really true. We would rather get projects on this list and then come back and say, okay, they don't need it, rather than missing something that should be on here and does need it. So this is a little bit a wider net, and we're going to slowly, as we refine, kind of slowly straight down in that, and figure out,
The reason we're pointing this list out to you, boss, sorry, John, to interrupt, is because if we follow the methodology and allocate first to existing projects, you can potentially use up most of the funding
Yeah.
on the existing projects, right? Just be aware of that. However, there are all these rules, like no more than 10% and all that. So once you factor all of that in, there's still probably some money over, but it all depends on what those cost estimates are and how we interpret the 10% rule, which, as I said, the methodology is a little unclear on.
so like a few of these, like they might have used, they could be eligible for CMAQ and STBG and receive funding from both, but they might have already come close or hit their CMAQ cap, so they would only potentially be eligible for STBG addition. It gets even a little bit more fuzzier than that. So it's just something that we have to go through each one of the applications, compare that to kind of the allocations, and literally just, it's probably going to be just as long of a process as scoring all the projects as well. So.
All John and Connor are going to basically do in March is draw up a matrix of all those different.
Not all, because I'm even doing the tip updates too.
If this, then give it 10%. If that, don't give it 10%. All those, they got to put that into a spreadsheet so we can actually apply it. It's complicated.
All right, any questions? John, before he steps down, and then we talk about the committee next.
Madam Chair, I had just one question on I-95 and just the travel demand model. I know that was under the STBG, but it's not really an STBG question. So it seems like basically in this methodology, that project doesn't really score that well. And I guess my concern with that, and I know with, smart scale, same thing, it doesn't score very well. It seems like something's not right with the modeling for that. I know like, I'll say VDOT was part of our exit 126 study for the VA. With the I-95, basically kind of southbound approaching exit 126. And the PM peak hour was like over 7,000 vehicles, like in 3 lanes. So you think if you're adding like a 4th lane there, you can get some significant level of service benefits. And just, there would be some significant congestion reduction benefits, but it seems like it's not being picked up by the travel demand model. Concern I would voice is just in terms of just the long-term effort of trying to widen I-95 between exit 130 and 126. Seems like we need to take a look at that and try to figure out like why that is. Why is the travel demand model not supporting that?
I can kind of answer it because one, this was actually the very first project that I scored in this process, and I completely I kind of had an idea of what the methodology would be. I was like, okay, this is going to knock it out of the park. What's going on here is that in this scoring methodology, which is going to be a huge chunk of points, you can see it doesn't score very well on the rank points and change in level RS or the rank points in LOS severity. What's happening here is that some other projects considered to the no build future year have pretty bad VC ratios, like truly bad. 95 is bad, but it's not as bad, but it becomes a ranked choice. So all of a sudden it's being compared to all the other projects and where it ranks in the VC ratio. So the ratio is a little bit less aggressive on kind of this particular segment. It's bad, but because some of the other ones are like you're seeing a lot, like exit 26, the chain points like that. Sorry, the level of service severity is through the roof on that one. I mean, there's a couple of these where the even the federal toolkit did not necessarily, we had to be very careful on the parameters that we were using for this and pulling them in, because if we made a quick error, it would throw it out because it did not like anything that resulted in a VC ratio of over 1. So if I brought it from 1.7 down to 1.1, it might not give us basically a good output. It'll see there's an error. So for 95, it's coming back to the point that like change in LLS for US later was actually a bigger VC reduction. But now if you want to compare actual volume and how much of a reduction in, say, traffic it might be, it might not be as aggressive. So it's kind of falling into this weird little gap where the VC ratio isn't necessarily might be overestimating one thing and underestimating another. But that's kind of how the criteria is filled out, because yeah, I was expecting this to come out extremely high up until I actually did the ranked choice, or sorry, not ranked choice, the ranked scoring within it, and then it all of a sudden dropped down to fifth or sixth, and it didn't get any points. So it's kind of a weird management there.
So the ranked choice
So like
picks winners.
Road had a bigger reduction in VC ratio than 95, just because it's a VC ratio issue.
Yeah.
But it's kind of that's kind of a weird way of how we're scoring it, just based on where it ranks within the VC ratio, because you can have a low volume road with a bigger reduction for a treatment, but you know, total volume impact might be off there.
Okay.
All right, quick question for you, so we can move along. So one, let's reinstitute that committee. If you were not on the committee, I know Stafford has some staff changes. And whoever on staff to send an email out and say who are gonna be your people. So that we can get that committee instituted, so that we all have action items to our leadership to say, you're gonna complain and you're gonna hate everybody because you didn't get the first spot. Leave us alone and let us try to get this right. But my second question is, whatever we get right, some of that will not have any impact on this, correct? So I would go ahead and let your leadership know that outside of changes because of the VDOT numbers, maybe some other small modifications, unless I'm saying this wrong, this is your number. This is what it is. God bless you.
And I would say there might be small amount of movement, just because some of the criteria could be, you know, a small amount. I don't
So
think
when
there's any chance of somebody's going to magically gain 2 or 3 points here and change, but there might be a little.
But when will you give that to us? I think that's all we need to know.
So we will bring it back to the next TAC meeting with the added in cost analysis from VDOT. But between now and then, we first got to, you know, send you those questions, because it's unclear to VDOT whether or not it includes 1, 2, and 3, and that will affect whether the cost estimate is accurate or not. So we need to, that takes some time to do that. We will do that, and we will bring any revisions to the next TAC meeting with all of that included.
So we'll set up the subcommittee. Nothing much is going to change for the next, you know, for your score. So please just humble your hearts, because staff does not need to be yelled at. Or you can, as long as they don't yell at me, it's not mine. And then the third question I have is, when will we address the cost overrun, I'll call it cost overrun funding, as it relates to that piece of the criteria?
So we have to find out, first of all, how to deal with that 10% question.
And
So,
will that be the subcommittee?
so the subcommittee needs to tell us how to deal with that 10% question, because it's not clear in the methodology how to deal with that. And of course, we won't know what the dollar amounts are until VDOT, probably only by the beginning of March, gives us those dollar amounts. We don't know how much money there's going to be.
Okay.
So all of that is going to affect that. So the first thing is sort out the 10%. How do we apply it? And the second thing will be, tell us how much money we have. Then we can apply the percentages. This methodology is written to break down the modes in a certain percentage formula. So let's say we got $1 million. You have to give, you know, 200,000 to roadways, 100,000 to transit, 50,000 to bike ped, etc. It breaks the percentages down, and when we've applied those percentages, we'll then know how much is available. What we can do in the meantime is verify what the cost estimates are of the old projects, because you've had some cost adjustments, so that we know how much additional funding is required for the old projects. And then we've got to deal with that 10% factor. So we need to solve some of those in the subcommittee, some of those by engaging with the applicant on their cost estimate, and then some of those only when we get the money.
Sure. All right, anybody have any further questions about next steps, Paul?
Madam Chair, you included like during the discussion that basically we should send an email, basically each locality or applicant, like on just comments.
Yeah.
To you, like what's the deadline for that?
Sooner than later, because we need to consider a response to that. Matthew's already kicked off. But we're preferring you to put it in one email rather than
Yeah.
every time you see another little thing, you send another email. So, John,
30 days, 60 days,
no.
a year?
No. Yeah, if we could get it,
Had a validation.
would you all be able to give us comments by Friday? Is that too soon?
2 weeks is.
Remember, you want to get the replies and resolve the issues before the next TAC.
I would
And-
say Monday, the 16th. I would not do it Friday because I'm not gonna do it.
Okay. Monday, close of business on Monday, the
Federal.
16th.
Yeah, Tuesday, the 17th.
It's fun.
I'm advocating
Monday.
I'm advocating for us to put in this work on Martin Luther King Day.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
5 p.m.
On
on
Tuesday.
Tuesday, the 17th. 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 17th.
All right.
I want you all to be able to have ample time to review it, and I want to have ample time that if you do see an issue, that we can explore it and provide a response.
Great.
Into our channel.
Next.
Oh, you validate.
All right, let's move on to item D. Gary, I'll turn that over to you. This is for the VDOT State Trails Office update.
And there are 3 different things going on here in Carrie's presentation. There's first the annual TAP applications. Then there's Paul's email about the new money, which is actually just additional TAP money. And then there's Matthew's question about how much does Stafford get for the TMA? That's also in this presentation. So all 3, Carrie, if you can whip through the slides.
Good morning. So this is information compiled from VDOT slides that Paul sent to us to make sure that you guys were aware of. So as part of Transportation Initiatives, Investment in Trails, which is a state and federal initiative, the general fund dollars approved this past June by the General Assembly for the planning, development, and construction of multi-use trails throughout the Commonwealth. The CTB prioritized the funds for new regional trails and projects that improve the connectivity of existing networks. And also there's a priority to provide geographic diversity in the trails that they chose for their priority trails. It also directs the establishment of a State Trails Office. This office will develop a State Trails Plan and an information clearinghouse. This office is going to coordinate with the advisory committee, which was already in existence, and the DCR. Next slide. The State Trails Office, they're currently hiring for 2 positions. They've got a consultant and they're coordinating with DCR and DRPT, and they had a presentation to their advisory committee. The General Assembly has already decided their 5 priority trails. They did this quite a while ago in coordination with their state advisory committee. These are the 5 trails: the Shenandoah Valley Trail, the Craig Botetourt Trail, Peaks to Creeks, Rockville Heritage, and Eastern Shore. 3 of the 5 are rail banking trails. This is a trail that is made from an old railway. It conserves rail lines until they're needed again, can be used again for railway when needed. Next slide. This is a map of said trails. You can tell that they are in different geographic areas: Shenandoah, the Blue Ridge, down here in Lynchburg, and the Southern Virginia, and the Eastern Shore. None of them, as you can see, are in our region. So that is the State Trails Office. Now we're going to move over to Transportation Alternative Set Aside. If you weren't already aware, we are moving into that again. It's time to start thinking about it. It's a biennial program, and we are in the application cycle. As you know, it's federal funded program. It's an 80-20 reimbursement program. We're in the Fredericksburg Construction District, and the CTB allocates $2 million per cycle. The project has a 4-year time limit. As we found out last year, if the project doesn't go to construction within 4 years, you get 50 points off in the next cycle, and that hit us last year in some of our localities. Yes.
Is that as in we got 50 points off last cycle, we're a clean slate now, or is it?
As I understand it, we're a clean slate now.
Okay.
Just next cycle. So you already got your. And also, as Ian mentioned, the TMA area gets another 177,000. That's allocated by Phantom Policy Board. Slide. So as mentioned, there's some new funding
This is funding for trails. Out of the Transportation Alternatives Program, there's 14 million, and out of the general fund, there's 89 million, so a total of 103 million extra just for trails funding.
Pretty exciting.
In the last cycle, at FY 23-24, this TAP funding for regional trails, none of it went to the Fredericksburg district. So we need to make sure get some of this. 14 out of 14 million, 11 million of it went to trails, and then 2 million more went for so-called future allocation. But that was allocated as of this fall, this past fall. Next slide. So, as I'm making this quick, it's the last slide. Our next steps. Historically, the portal opens in mid-May, so start thinking of your projects now and compiling them. Regional trails and connecting trails, things that connect at a bigger network, are very encouraged. So pre-applications are due July 1st, and your final application deadline is October 1st. And this is for all GWRC localities, not just FAMPO. And then we will monitor developments at the State Trails Office. This is going to be important too. Coordinate our efforts to select our regional trail priorities and communicate with the CTB so the state is aware of what we need so we can get on that priority list for the future. And I know that you have some things to say.
Well, the reason why basically I, and I think a couple others had asked about this as well, asked to discuss this, it just seems like a great opportunity to try to get some funding for trails. I mean, I'll say historically, there hasn't really been that much this type of funding. And my thought is we should just regionally come up with a short list of what we think our top priorities are, and then work through the FAMPO process and with our CTB member, Ms. Sellers, and try to basically raise awareness of that and BDOT as well. I mean, just to try to get some of these projects funded. And I'll say just in our region, like the two that came to mind to me were like the East Coast Greenway, which goes right down through FAMPO north to south, and then BCR Trail. There's probably some other trail options as well. I know the Dahlgren Trail out in King George might be an option. So this seems like a great opportunity, and just the level of funding here. I mean, $103 million. I mean, if you compare that just to like TAP, like the traditional like $2 million every 2 years, I mean, this is a much greater fund of funding. So we definitely, I think, should take advantage of it and try to see what we can get.
Great. So how do we do that, Paul? Because I want to kind of get an action from this to do that, because I think you're right. And if we talk about trails one more time, because everybody wants trails, but then it's to your point of, well, nobody has money for trails. If it's a road or a trail, you're going to lose. So how do we, what's next steps? Do we set up a subcommittee? Do we ask FAMPO to help, staff to help? Do you say we're not going to help and we need to do it on our own? What's the next steps?
So there are two different things. The one is if it's for this round to apply for your projects. I mean, Stafford needs to give us a project for the TMA area because FAMPO has to choose it, but we actually look to the jurisdiction concerned to come up with a project, right? So please come up with a project. And for the general funds, all of you need to start looking to your localities to apply for the regular TAP funding. But for this bigger pot, what I suggest is that we collect among us a list of potential projects we think should be prioritized, and then maybe next TAC meeting we can discuss the priorities, right? Here are the 4 that people have suggested. Which ones and why do we think should be prioritized? I don't want to get into scoring. That would just be
Trail projects, which are always good things. Sometimes trail projects are not as easy as people think they are. As evidence, BCR Trail Bridge, that's been a project since 2017. City has said we got to do it for them, and we're still not getting any traction.
Can't get the what information?
With the length of the bridge.
from who?
FEMA.
From FEMA.
So FEMA.
To get that from FEMA.
Okay.
So we have that, can't set the length of the bridge, can't determine final estimate for the project. So you have to have good information, you have to have a smart scale like for these TAP projects. That means you have to have a good sketch, know your risks. You have to have a good estimate. And they'll draw a line on a piece of paper and say, I want to trail from here to here, and tell me it costs $200,000. Saying, no, it's not. Got trees in the way, you're gonna have utilities in the way. Ask the city about Twin Lake Kensington and what's happened there.
Don't ask the city about this.
Residents. Shared use path is about this long. Short. So they're great things, we encourage them, but they're not easy projects. With a lot of risk.
Are you talking to somebody in the city about getting that FEMA thing or?
Yeah, the city is, we're on it.
City, we're on it.
Okay.
At the hands
FEMA, it
FEMA.
might be
Okay.
5 years from now.
Okay.
It's just none of that's easy.
For the priority trails thing, we need to do more research on that because I think those 5, they're working on them right now and I don't know when the next cycle is for choosing more. But transportation alternatives is going on right now. The cycle is starting. So that's what we need to focus on. And I know there's extra money for trails and they're encouraging trails as part of transportation.
So let's focus on the transportation alternatives unless somebody says anything different over the next at least couple of months, so that we can get you good projects. I will say to Michelle's point, if you have an engineer on staff, talk to them about these projects, because that was the city's issue. So I would just say, please make sure so you can get some valid cost estimates and identify issues, particular with time and space. And then also, I can say for the city, for Spotsy in the city, some of our coordination has been really, really good, and we've gotten into the weeds on some of these trail and or pedestrian projects, and let's just make sure that we're continuing to do more of that, because we can get it right that way, because we're both looking at multiple things, so. So any other comments or questions? I think right now we're just saying, let's move forward with the TAP projects and provide good information, so that later your project does not get killed.
Right.
So our jurisdictions need to be preparing TAP applications, right?
Right, well, what I was saying is I think all the jurisdictions are probably going to do that, but I think to consider is just with this, and I give Michelle's point that for the East Coast Greenway or BCR Trail, we may not be ready to do any kind of segment of that right away, but
by the time we do it, we might as well start now, in my opinion.
yeah, but identifying kind of what the priorities are, and then maybe if there's a segment that's higher priority that needs maybe some more work to make the project kind of ready, we could work on that and maybe try to get it ready for the next round of funding for this, this trail funding, which I'm not sure when that is. It might also be helpful for somebody to find out what the process is for this, like when do we need to know? Kind of like what our project is to kind of tell the state decision makers.
We need to talk to our CTV member. Find out what's going on with all of that.
We have a new CTV member who may not be au fait with all the details of the program. So can we ask Carrie to find out the details and give us some feedback? Right.
Okay. So next meeting, we'll get some additional details on that component, Paul, just as a follow-up. And then if you can, when you have time, just start generating that list. Because what we may just ask you to do is some sort of ranking survey monkey so people can respond quickly to kind of prioritize what those trails and or segments would be. But again, I don't need you to do that right away.
Right. I mean, we did the preliminary work when we did our George Washington Greenway study.
Send it out to us again.
Say that.
Send it out again.
No, right. But I mean, as a region, we work together to compile a network of what the most important trails are. So I think
we've already done that work.
It won't be hard to narrow down what are.
Okay. Okay.
Good.
And then I would also say just circle it with BPAC too, because that's what they're there for. So if they can give us some feedback for this group, that would help too. So maybe in a couple of meetings, come back with whatever that is, so that at least we have a working group that already said this is important to them, and we can kind of kick off from this group. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Carrie before we move on to the last item on the agenda? All right, next item is OIP. Ian, that is you, sir.
Yeah, so we know not very much at this stage. What we know is what Jatenda reported at the last quarterly information session of OIP, which is basically what you see there in front of you. That's all we know. That the midterm needs and priorities are going to be revised, that there are going to be regional workshops for participation during the course of this calendar year. And that last bullet point, I think, is basically caused by FAMPO, because he mentioned in the meeting that, yes, we know FAMPO is concerned about this issue, and they have raised the matter with us that truck delay times is not a metric that is currently measured and doesn't lead to VTrans needs being chosen in the region, and that we need to deal with this question. So he's aware of our concerns, but all we know is what's on that slide. We understand from what he said that they're going to send out information to tell us when those workshops will take place. Paul just suggested that we raise it at the TAC because we should, I think, if I understand correctly, get a common view as to what, not just truck metrics, but what we want to see out of the VTrans need review that's going to take place this year. What do we as a region think should be achieved when we give our inputs, when we go to the workshop? I don't know if you want to comment further.
I know that was great. One comment just on the first bullet there on the corridors of statewide significance. I'm wondering basically if Route 3 could ever be considered that. I mean, it's certainly very important for our kind of area as well as kind of Culpeper area.
I don't know if VDOT has any comment on how those corridors of statewide significance are chosen. I don't know.
As far as adding a new one, the new ones have been added. We have had some conversation regarding Route 3 through the northern neck of Virginia, for example, which has not gotten a whole lot of traction. I don't know, Michelle, do you know anything else?
Other than that, I mean.
Is
Has been very interesting.
is this section of Route 3? Yeah, no, I know about that. But the section through Fredericksburg and Pennsylvania, is that currently a corridor of statewide significance?
It is not. The only portion that might be is any part that it connects you to this train station here. There are some weird little connections, but not the entire corridor. Now, the highway is a principal arterial all the way up to Route 301, and then beyond it's a minor arterial. So you have some of those sort of complications as well. And so it can certainly be proposed. There is a process.
I mean, I would be happy for us to propose it. It's a significant problem.
You very well might want to work in coordination with North Neck PDC, for example, and our residency down that way, because they have had that discussion. And it's very difficult of course, that came about because smart scale applications are hard to come by out there because the needs aren't there. So you would get some, I'm sure you get some support from them.
We spoke to them last year. The problem with their portion of it is that the traffic is so much less and the congestion is not there. So I don't know what the metrics are for choosing corridors of statewide significance, but the section here from the city out into Spotsylvania certainly has got lots of metrics that show you it's a problematic road, whereas I'm not sure out there in the northern neck it's as, what factors do they look at? Congestion, crashes, what are the issues that they look at in terms of making a designation?
There's some interesting things that if you start looking at the maps, I believe it's 58, southwestern part of the state, where it actually follows a couple of different routes, one particular corridor. And there was, some aspect of that was considered as well. So that's a possibility. The thing about historic corridor statewide significance, of course, the two that we have in our district run from, Maryland to North Carolina, or, North Carolina up to as far as 17 goes. And so Route 3 does not span such, a distance, begins at Culpeper, right? So,
So you're saying there's probably a challenge because it's an area as opposed to something that would be statewide based on your criteria?
yeah, and again, statewide significance, obviously that in itself is the description of what one of these corridors should do, is have statewide significance. So I think therein lies more of the difficulty. Again, we were attempting to see if it could be like Route 3 in Northern Neck could be paired with 17 as part of that corridor as well, because we see some example of that in the southwestern part of the state. Again, haven't gotten anywhere with that.
Do you have somewhere on the internet or some document that refers to criteria that you could let us as a TAC look at?
Yeah, I'm sure it's, there's something in the, well, I'll find it for you.
Send us something. We'll send it out to the TAC so that people can be more aware of what the criteria are.
To see if it would actually be,
Yeah, it's better to look at the criteria first before we start jumping to conclusions.
or just to ask you to do something that is not going to fruition.
I mean, that's to connect
Multiple areas.
centers of the state. Just have a multimodal component. Has to move freight.
Staff?
So, you have to demonstrate we're moving freight across the state. There's some other things, and there's a 2010 document. I don't know if they're sure.
Yeah, anyway, I just think more information is better than, yeah, exactly. So that's the point. If we can find out those criteria, then we don't have a discussion that's not informed. I hate to have long discussions, then we find out, oh, it's got to be red, and you don't have a red one, then you just wasted a lot of people's time going around in a circle. I'd like to have the discussion with the information available so that we,
Can answer the
talk
question.
sense.
Yeah. Any other questions on this item? All right.
I will notify you as soon as I know when the Beachtrons needs workshops are going to occur, and I'd certainly encourage everybody here from our region to please attend so that we are represented and that we make our voice heard on the issues that concern us.
All right, thanks. Item F, problems with economic development.
Yeah, so our last item, I withdrew the letter because it was just becoming such a fight at 6 o'clock on the day, right? So I just withdrew the letter. However, subsequently, we've had a bunch of requests for missing documents related to economic development. We've supplied, I think, all of those. It's been a bit of a chaotic process. I certainly think that it is true to say that the technical guide for smart scale does have some room for improvement in terms of clarifying exactly what is meant. If it wasn't for that little footnote that Marcy Parker pointed to us, then I would call the document misleading. And so you get out of being misleading with a very small footprint hidden very far away. It's not even in the actual text of the document that it refers to a line of movement, right? So there is room for confusion, and I do think that the technical guide should be revised. I think it's probably too late to do anything about this round, but I certainly think that that technical guide could do with some textual improvement. That's my own take, but I know everybody has different views on this subject. So,
Any comments or questions to Ian on item F?
So the one thing I guess I wanted to add, there was another kind of subsequent issue with the economic development, which happened basically kind of right before New Year's, where we kind of got a request. I think all the localities did it for district, like on kind of Thursday afternoon, and there's like a noon Friday basically deadline, and a lot of people were out that day. But I guess I just want to understand between like the two kind of requests. So they both had kind of short turnaround times. And basically they kind of came out of the blue. Why did that happen? Like it hasn't happened in other, basically, prior rounds of, Smart Scale. And this time it happened twice, once in the fall and then once basically on December 29th. And I just wanted to get VDOT's perspective on that.
Well, our perspective resembles your perspective. This is an OIP request, and we needed additional information to give y'all the best opportunity to have successful applications is what it boils down to. The reviews there's a whole series of reviews, as you know, we go through between the time of the application submission and the time we finally score them, which is in process now. It goes through, the economic development site goes through, our own land use people do their reviews of that. And that had already occurred a couple months ago. And we were not aware of this table of data that had kept track of some questions that OIP reviewers had had. And that's where that came back. That came back late to us, just like it did to you. We, of course, reported it to you immediately, give everyone a chance to, again, supplement those applications well beyond when we should, I'm sure, have been doing that. And that bothers me more than anything is the idea of an objective, consistent application, because we're allowing people to update certain ones, but not others potentially, even though the idea there is that the other ones don't need to be supplemented. But we were allowing that supplementing. And you're exactly right. This did not occur in prior rounds. We did not have this. And it is our desire that we don't see it again. But thank everyone for their efforts that they did make to get those into us. Again, it was the same burden on us as we were also down at the end of the year and had most of our people off Christmas vacation. And they're like, okay, but we were able to get it done. And
this went out statewide, went to all districts, everybody, all the districts. Various localities around the state, a couple things. So it wasn't just.
we were number 4 on the list of how many, but the 3 that were above us had many, many, many more than we did. Obviously, those were those bigger districts like Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia. But yeah, there were issues throughout the state. And everyone received them equally as unexpectedly. And I may not be right on that, because some of the ones that were down that didn't have as many, maybe they were aware of something. But yeah, there was a mad scramble. And OIP kind of did it to themselves, because they were trying to deal with, 450 applications instead of, the ones we had for our district. So it was quite a scramble. Anything that we may have done to miss something along the way, our apologies are out. But again, it was not anything that we did in Fredericksburg district that caused this. It was just there is a higher level every time. They bring on additional resources to do reviews, and we do reviews, and they do reviews, communication. Last round we introduced the idea of subs, and it was sort of like that. Came on kind of at the end. Unfortunately, we got a little bit bigger jump on that, but it was the same sort of thing. The reviews go back and forth, and then you get right down to the end, and there's some of them that haven't been done. Some of the applicants haven't concurred, and it was very similar to that. This round was. This is the economic development sites for the issue.
Did all of the basically applicants in the Fredericksburg area get completed basically by the deadline?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the last one, we actually allowed one early last week. One additional one came through. And again, when that happens, I'm not sure, because, they said, okay, January 1st is your new deadline. Well, because they had sent it out to them before January 1st, I was like, yeah, we can accept this. We went ahead and every time that happens, we have to roll back our validation that we've done. And that's it. And so there's all these steps you go through. And I assure you, it's the last thing in the world we want to see. And we hope we don't have to do it again.
Thank y'all for your work.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
At this point, we're all validated. I know more last minute requests.
I will never say 100% to anything. To my knowledge, Everything's validated and in really good shape.
Great.
Yep.
My only comment, and I don't want to belabor it, is we're just lucky that Carrie only took 1 day leave and not 2 days leave. Because the other person who worked on those is Lana, who no longer works for FAMPO, who now lives in Chicago. So if Carrie had taken 1 more day's leave, we would not have been able to do the job.
Thank you.
Because the rest of us would not have known, it would have taken longer than the deadline that you had set us to find the documents. It would have been impossible.
I was on leave on Thursday, so I didn't even get Melinda's emails until Friday morning. And I was
So,
like, oh, what? I have 2 hours to do what?
You make the magic happen.
Do it for 2 hours? She doesn't have nothing to do. That in 2 hours, she is like super fast.
You have no idea what we went through on that Friday.
All right, number 8 is correspondence that was in your agenda packet before. We don't need to go through that unless somebody wants to, but it's the MPO certification and additional information on federal related funding. Number 9, staff reports. Do y'all have anything for the group?
No, I have something under member reports.
Sure. All right, I'll change it over to member reports, and those are items A. If anybody has any cost estimates, we just talked about those, but please alert the group now. If not, notification of new transportation projects by locality, same point. Does anybody have any items there? All right, and as far as members go, Ian, I'll let you go, and then I know we've got folks in Stafford, so.
Yeah, I was going to talk to the same thing.
Please.
Alex has resigned, and so our first vice chair of this TAC is no longer with us, and so Stafford needs to propose a new first vice chair so that we can elect a vice chair for FAMPO. Paul is the second vice chair from Swansea.
Sure. Okay. So Stafford, I will leave that over to y'all if y'all can let us know by next month, at least, unless y'all know now.
They've already indicated
Okay.
on an email to us that
So
they're ready to nominate.
Oh, can I nominate myself for first vice chair?
Yeah.
So they're nominating Matt
Okay.
to fulfill the rest of Alex's term until
Does
the
that
end
need to
of
be a
June.
vote for this committee, or is that just an appointment?
No, this committee needs to elect the person, but they get to nominate a candidate.
So Matt has been nominated to be the first vice chair for TAC.
Second.
All right, we've got a second from Spotsy. Any discussion? Don't have any? No, I'm kidding, you can. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, you may be Ian's boss, like in the next. All right, one of his many. Any other updates for the group? I'm sorry, I said that out loud.
Everybody's my boss.
Any updates, Deputy?
Yeah, just update. Statewide projects for the trend. And that was March 30th into the 5th. So I don't know.
Just say that again?
Transit
Yeah.
brand is part of it. We have the new statewide transit.
Right.
But yes, that needs to be the language.
Needs to be for FAMPO?
Statewide programs.
So you need to email us a request to do that, surely.
The email came out in October. I don't know if it doesn't have to be a tip amendment. It's really a modification. It doesn't do.
Can we just handle this over email? Can you just email me what you want us to do and then we'll get it done? Thank you. It's just quicker than because otherwise I'll sit here and argue the details and I don't want to do that.
Correct, so we'll add that. So did you have something?
There's a problem, we have a public hearing next week. Spotsylvania County about the,
And I just want to say you guys have done a fantastic job putting up the signs and everything. I don't think I've seen that on VDOT projects before.
we've done that once.
Once or twice, yeah. Fantastic job. Yeah. And there's a
The information is at elementary school from 5 to 7. Saying 9 to 18, so if you're interested in that. Many roads.
We'll be there.
Good luck.
All right, any other updates, questions, comments from the group?
I
And then,
Go ahead.
go
I
ahead.
just want to introduce someone. We've got a new planning specialist senior, Cassie Lord. She's here with us today over here by Michelle. She's a new assistant, and you'll be seeing and hearing a lot from her. So just wanted everyone to be able to put a face with a name.
We have tons of things for you to do.
Yeah, welcome.
So we can't.
Welcome aboard. We're happy.
Welcome.
Our meetings hopefully usually aren't this long, but you know, Nick Ruiz, who is no longer at the table, is his fault.
Really quick, GeoGrid Connect updates. One, we're hiring, so we have an open GeoGrid Connect position that we're looking to fill. I think we've already received over 100 applications.
Oh my
But
Lord.
yeah, so we're feeling hopeful. But if you know anyone, please refer them our way. It's posted on the GeoGrid website. And two, we've kicked off a strategic planning effort for GeoGrid Connect. So we'll be reaching out to most folks in this room to be involved in the stakeholder meeting in February, sending out a survey and things like that. So if you can just boost that on your end, that would be really.
Any other items? Just let everybody know I've hired a deputy for Fredericksburg Regional Transit, so I will stop doing as much work. That is the goal. So her name is, and spots of people may know, Melody Fowler. She's the person that we're bringing on. So I'm excited to have her. So I will start responding to your emails. So thank you. So sorry, we went a little bit over. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? All right, we're not going with nays today. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.